Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Charles Motzinger. I'm one of the medical physicians here and part of the Mavericks team. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mary Holland, who's going to be um, giving our lecture today about the Children's Health Defense. So I'm going to do a brief introduction about Mary. I'll turn over the floor to her, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So in brief, Mary is the Chief Executive Officer of Children's Health Defense, and she's been involved in the vaccine choice and health freedom movement for more than 2 decades. Through its education, advocacy, litigation, and research, the CHD challenges federal and state governments, pharmaceutical companies, and corporations and corrupt regulatory agencies to end the practices that are harming children's health. Before joining CHD staff in the fall of 2019, she directed the graduate lawyering program at NYU School of Law for 15 years and lectured at the Columbia Law School on international human rights advocacy. She frequently testified in state legislatures around the country to retain or expand religious, medical, and philosophical exemptions to vaccine mandates. She's co-authored 2 books on vaccines, one called The Vaccine Epidemic and The HPV Vaccine on Trial, Seeking Justice for a Generation Betrayed, and many articles about vaccine law and policy. So, Mary, over to you.
Mats, thank you so much. And Denisa, and I'm really delighted to be here. I'm excited. I think there is a lot of overlap between Maverick's agenda and ours. So I'm going to share my screen. So our mission is to end the epidemic of chronic childhood disease. And one of the exciting things about 2024, I'm just going to share with you some of the achievements of 2024, is that our founder, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services for the U.S. government. And that is a pretty extraordinary, some might even say fairly miraculous event. So I'm just going to share with you some of what we've been doing as an organization in 2024, and then talk about some of the current things going on. So our motto at the moment is, protecting children, exposing harm, seeking justice. We have a kind of multifaceted set of activities that we're engaged in. So we have 4 pillars, we say: education, advocacy, science, and litigation. And this gives you an idea. We have millions of website views. We have chapters around the world. We publish a daily newsletter, The Defender. We have a daily streaming service, CHD TV, and we have about 30 cases that we're engaged with right now. So as I said, we've got 4 pillars. We're active in all these areas. In my view, much like Mavericks is in a lot of different areas, I think it's the synergy of these different areas that really contribute to CHD, I think, being very successful, but with lots and lots more work to do. So Defender, I highly recommend to people. Sadly, it's only coming out in English. For a while there, we were translating into a number of languages. We're not able to do that right now, but we have over 500,000 subscribers, 51 million third-party views. We are really putting out somewhere about 8 stories, 6 to 8 stories a day, a lot of it original content, some of it reposted. But we pride ourselves that our citations are really, really good. We hyperlink to all kinds of basic science or government publications. If we get it wrong, we will acknowledge that. But generally speaking, I think we're a very credible source of information. You can rely on what we're producing. CHD TV goes out for about a half an hour to an hour every day. And we also will stream the WHO meetings, hearings in Congress, meetings at the FDA, meetings at the CDC, videos that we think are really important. We also produce films. Also, we're reaching over 500,000 direct subscribers through third-party content. We're reaching over 5 million people on a regular basis, often more than that. We've made films, 3 Vaxxed films. Vax 3 was really about what happened during COVID, Authorized to Kill. It focuses very much on the United States, but of course, what happened during COVID was a global phenomenon, so very relevant to what's happened in all of your home countries. It's free on our website, as are Vaxxed and Vax 2. I'd be happy to answer questions. I consider them to be really important films to understand the whole vaccine issue, which is central to CHD, but it's not the only issue we deal with. We deal with all of the toxic exposures that are clearly harming today's children. So I would urge you to take a look at those. We do other things too. We publish books with Skyhorse Publishing, a lot on children's health. This was a book about siblings of children who have severe problems, developmental delays, about the problems in the military that arose from COVID, Canada, down the rabbit hole. And here's one on pets. A really lovely book about how a veterinarian came to be a homeopath in treating animals and giving up on basically vaccinating animals. And then The Killing Machine, very, very sobering book about, what happened during COVID was by far not the first or only time. We do have a lot of resources that we put towards electromagnetic radiation and wireless radiation. We do think that this is a growing threat to children's health in particular, fetal health, and very poorly understood, poorly publicized. We've just had this proliferation over the last 30 years that essentially has not been adequately studied, or the people who are critical of what has happened over the last 30 years have essentially been silent. So that's an area where we are doing a lot on our website. We have a lot of information about that. We're bringing litigation, we're doing advocacy, and so on. We do have chapters. Sadly, we were not able to sustain a European chapter, a major chapter covering all of Europe, but we do have chapters in Ireland, in the UK, in Iceland. We're looking at one right now in Italy. We have one in South Africa. And we do have readers and subscribers and friends around the world. We definitely feel like we are very much engaged with a grassroots movement for medical freedom and for health choice, which is inextricably related with freedom overall. Social media, we're on X in particular, but other ones as well, but Children's HD. This is a place to get immediate news from us. We're getting a lot of play on social media, and it does seem like increasingly, for better or worse, this is how the world communicates. I mentioned the books. This is a book that I think for those of you who are really interested in vaccines, I highly recommend to you. This is written by Shaz Khan, an author who happens to live in Switzerland. But this is a book that really is a reference for the whole history of vaccines, their advertisement, the liability protections that have been given, the ones that have been taken off the market, the fines that the manufacturers have paid. It's a really comprehensive, excellent book. As a reference, if this is an area of interest. So I want to talk about what's sort of going on. What is the state of the art in the United States, or the state of the government, maybe more accurately? I think the US in many ways sets the pace globally. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention works hand in glove with the World Health Organization. The US has been more aggressive than I believe any other country in its vaccine program, but what happens in the US absolutely does proliferate to other countries. So, the schedule at this point, the federally recommended vaccine schedule, and we'll come back to new developments in that, but it starts pre-pregnancy, throughout pregnancy, and then literally from the day of birth through the grave. That is the current vaccine schedule in the United States, the recommended schedule. So this is interesting. Even before you get pregnant, make sure you get your measles, mumps, and rubella shot at least a month before you get pregnant. And then during pregnancy, the US recommends, the federal government, CDC, still recommends a pertussis shot, which actually comes as a Tdap shot. It also comes with tetanus, a flu shot, and a respiratory syncytial virus shot. And until a couple days ago, it also included a recommendation for a COVID shot. Essentially no science on most of these. And possibly they also say maybe even some other vaccines, hepatitis A, hepatitis B. And then if we go towards the day of birth, the first dose of the hepatitis B shot for a sexually transmissible disease or one through IV drug use is the day of birth. And then you can see this is just an incredible schedule of 0 through 18 years, depending on the brand and the actual condition of the kid. It actually adds up to between 75 and 100 vaccines for a kid from birth to 18. Now, again, very recently, Robert Kennedy, as the HHS secretary, has advised that the COVID shot is no longer recommended for most children, no longer recommended for so-called healthy children, a little ambiguous, and it is the basis of quote unquote shared decision making. So the federal government is no longer recommending the COVID shot for all children, which it was recommending until a week ago, 2 weeks ago, to all babies starting at 6 months. And I can assure you that the pediatricians were recommending that, and the sort of the medical associations were recommending it. So this is just a quick schematic of how the recommended vaccine schedule has shifted, has changed drastically in the United States from the 1960s. So 1960s, most children were getting a polio shot. I don't know that most were getting smallpox actually, but polio and diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. And then after the MMR was invented in the early 60s, by the late 60s, kids were getting MMR, DPT, polio. And then this is 1986, which is a sort of watershed year, which is when Congress passed this liability shield for the medical profession and for the pharmaceutical profession, so that they no longer had liability in the event of harm or death. And they acknowledged in this 1986 act that there would be likely harm and death. So then what we see is that the schedule just explodes, right? So with no liability, so you can get it compelled by the states. You don't have to worry about a litigation risk. It's essentially just kind of a cash cow, right? Get it on the schedule, and then you're compelling millions of kids to take it. Typically, there's about 4 million kids in a birth cohort. There's about 70 plus million kids under 18. So it's billions of dollars, right? Getting something on the federally recommended schedule is billions of dollars. As we see, it's over, it's well in the 70 doses. But at the same time that this schedule has drastically exploded, there has been this coterminous expansion of children with chronic conditions, not acute, right? We're not talking about like measles or rubella. We're talking about chronic health conditions. So depression, obesity, suicidality, developmental disability, anxiety, ADHD, asthma, food allergy. And this is just a very partial list. And the latest data are that it's 1 in 31 children with autism. That's been tracked for about the last 20 years. It's gone from 1 in 10,000 pre-1986 to now 1 in 31. It's actually 1 in 12 and a half boys in California. It's much more prevalent in boys than girls. And there was a big announcement back in April by Robert Kennedy as HHS secretary. We're going to get to the bottom of what's causing the autism epidemic. He has promised that at least the beginnings of that research would be available by September. He is avidly looking at sort of data analysis from Medicaid data and other federally available data banks to look at, what appear to be potentially causal factors. So this is just a graph of how the prevalence in autism has grown so exponentially. And he got a lot of pushback for his announcement about the 1 in 31 and his focus on the disease, on this condition. And he got a lot of pushback because he really described the 30% of these people with autism diagnoses who have really, really severe medical and developmental problems, many without speech, many not toilet trained, many with severe problems. And, there was a huge pushback. No, this is just neurodiversity. But the reality is at least that 30% really don't have a likelihood of employment or of lives without a lot of difficulty. So that's the childhood schedule and what's happened with children, but the adult issues are really not so terribly different. So we don't see compulsion of adults to vaccinate generally, although we certainly saw that in COVID. People in the US were going to lose their jobs in many, many, many sectors, including the military, if they didn't take the COVID shots, which were experimental. They were emergency use authorization only. But there's a huge battery of federally recommended vaccines. And what we find in places like nursing homes, in places like the military, in places like the Veterans Administration, where to some extent there's a captive audience, Medicaid, you find hyper vaccination across the life spectrum. So, why has this happened? How is it that vaccines have become such a mainstay of the global medical profession? At least in the United States, it's pretty clear that money does have a lot to do with it. It's very lucrative, right? If you have no litigation risk and you can mandate it, there's no feedback loop, right? There's no penalty to pay if the medicine doesn't work because it's mandated. There's no penalty to pay if nobody can litigate against you. And so, the revenue stream by 2025, about $70 billion. The mandates, the liability protection, right? That's really what's going on. The unbiased science, which is not as robust as we would want it to be, but the unbiased science does show that people who have not been vaccinated are far healthier than the people who are. I think the world is seeing this with respect to the COVID shots, which I personally don't consider to be vaccines, but certainly people are seeing that the people who took the COVID shots were more likely to get COVID. That's a big Cleveland Clinic study, but they also have suffered some very, very severe consequences like death from myocarditis, pericarditis, stroke, and so on. In my view, and I believe probably those subscribing to Mavericks, this should be any bodily intervention should be between you and your healthcare practitioner. If that, there should not be any compulsory medicine. It violates the premise of informed consent, which was what came out of the medical atrocities of World War II. So in the US context, these are the things that I consider to be most important going forward. Is we would have to have Congress get rid of 3 laws that really create endemic problems. One is this Bayh-Dole Act from 1980, which gives the government itself profits from vaccines or from other medical inventions, right? The people, the scientists in the National Institutes of Health get royalties that they can literally even pass on to their heirs. That's obviously a huge conflict. The National Institutes of Health made hundreds of millions of dollars from the Moderna and Pfizer shots. That's just untenable. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, 1986, that really created the kinds of the lack of incentives. It created the incentives for the pharmaceutical industry and the lack of incentives for the healthcare providers and pharma to do anything about it because there's basically no downside risk to them. And then the 2005 PrEP Act is what really created the basis for COVID, right? So this is even worse than the 86 Act. It says that if anything is emergency use only, EUA, emergency use authorization, there's just no liability. You don't even get to a court. You go to this HHS compensation program that's worse than a kangaroo court. So what's happened literally the day before yesterday, right, Monday, Kennedy announced that to restore trust in vaccines, we'll see about that, but he terminated all of the 17 advisors on what's called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is a body associated with the Centers for Disease Control, CDC. And so in one fell swoop, he eliminated all 17 of whom have financial conflicts of interest, whether it's through their institution or through stock holdings or through research grants. All of them were associated with pharma. Basically, ACIP is known as simply a rubber stamp. And he called it that, and that they have, allowed vaccines to go through that had no comparator, no inert placebo comparator. So literally with no control group. And he just actually published a great X late last night, where he really rips into CNN for publishing an article that suggests that, oh no, all vaccines are tested against placebos. Well, no, it's all how you define placebo. In the book that Mats mentioned, the HPV book that I did, they didn't use real placebos, and we called them faux-cebos. They're just false placebos. They call them a placebo, but they're very bioactive. So it does a great job in this long ex post of showing people that the media has been captured, right? The biggest advertiser in mainstream media is the pharmaceutical industry. They just do their bidding. So anyway, questions for the health freedom movement in my view, are, can we be more united? I think we can be more powerful if we are more united. How can we better communicate? How can we better align for maximum impact in the US context? And I think that Kennedy is leading the charge for health freedom in some ways, not only for the United States, but for people around the world, by pulling out of the World Health Organization, by suggesting that there are very serious problems in global public health. It's going to be critical in the US context to ensure that in the 2026 elections, the opposition party at this point, the Democratic Party, doesn't get a majority, because if they do, there will be investigations that will basically thwart Kennedy as HHS secretary from getting anything done, is the expectation. So the 2026 elections in the US become pretty critical. So, I'm happy to address the questions, Mats, that you mentioned to me, but just, this is our website. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You can sign up to get alerts for the daily CHD TV programming. You can sign up on, we have a community forum where you can sort of connect with other people at CHD to ask questions, to find one another. So that's a little bit. And Mats, if you want, I can go through the questions that you mentioned. What would be best?
That sounds great. And the first question that we had kind of talked about was, and you did a really great job laying out the challenges and kind of describing how we got to where we are, and the legislation that needs to be changed. So there's like so much that is there. So if you had to identify something as, what is the biggest challenge that you see for the health freedom, personal sovereignty movement, what would you see with your knowledge and your ability to kind of have the connections within that environment?
Well, there's a variety of issues, but I think that we're very, very fortunate to have, for the first time, real allies in government. And I think that their job and our job is to educate more people so that we can expand this movement. I do think that Kennedy brought about 5 million votes to President Trump. And so he recognizes that. That allowed him to have a convincing victory in the 2024 presidential elections. So we, as a 5 million person voting bloc, were important. What if we were in the US a 50 million voting bloc, right? That gives incredibly more power. What if we were a 500 million voting bloc around the world? Then we start to really control the game. Right now, I mean, we're precarious. Candidly, we're precarious. And I say that with humility. I think we've made incredible strides as a movement that has been censored, has been marginalized. The dissident scientific voices have been very effectively defunded and silenced. I mean, it's extraordinary. I think where we are is a result of COVID, largely, the mass scale of the injuries and deaths. Certainly, we have not yet had a real reckoning for what's happened with COVID. But I think our biggest challenge is to educate people about the reality of what vaccines are doing. Most people have no idea, or don't want to know, frankly, how injurious vaccines have been. And I think similarly, how injurious sort of the food supply, the sort of really non-nutritive food supply has become, or that fluoridation in the water has caused harm, or geoengineering or electromagnetic radiation. In a certain way, once you sort of lead your life the way you do, it's hard to accept that it may be harming you. But I think education is a huge part of the job, and advocacy to enlarge the movement. Once the movement becomes 50 million, 150 million, it becomes much more unstoppable than it is right now.
And you touched on some of the recent successes that have been achieved, and but any other successes that you can think
Yeah.
of? I was listening to some other podcasts. You were mentioning kind of some laws that Idaho has,
Yeah.
so some successes in different jurisdictions. And
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Kennedy has done a lot in the short time that he's been in office. So he has sort of changed the guard substantially, not entirely. It's a huge bureaucracy. He's dismissed about 20,000 people who are doing things of, less importance, including things like terminating, the 50-year quest for an HIV vaccine. He's said that he's going to create a new agency within HHS to focus on vaccine injury. He's changed at FDA, generally recognized as safe, has basically been whatever industry wanted to say. If industry said it was safe, it was safe. There wasn't much inquiry beyond that. Obviously, he's really looking into the conflicts of interest in these advisory bodies. Those are important things. Essentially, he has taken the agenda that he worked on at Children's Health Defense with us and taken it to an institutional level. Clearly, he is not able to get done all of the things that one can be critical of, right? So, he took off the COVID shot recommendation for children and pregnant women, but it's not a complete barring. He has not yet ended the declaration of an emergency around COVID. There are plenty of things that even getting rid of the ACIP committee, in now looking for new people to fill that committee, he has said explicitly, I don't want anyone who's on the record as being anti-vaccine. In a certain way, any doctor who's still in there or nurse who's in their job at a mainstream institution likely will have had to take a COVID shot. And so it's not as if anybody coming into that space it comes with a tabula rasa. That doesn't really exist. So there are plenty of things, but sort of from the movement, you mentioned the best health freedom law that has been passed to date is in Idaho. So Idaho tends to be a conservative state with a lot of very sort of free-thinking people. It's a relatively small population in the United States, but it is a statute now that basically says no medical intervention may be required for attendance at school or for you to maintain your job. And it also goes further to say you cannot be exiled or quarantined from your place of work or your place of school so long as you are healthy. So right now in most states, if you're unvaccinated in the school context, you have to stay out of school for 2 weeks if there's been a single case of measles or mumps or whatever it is. And that does away with that in Idaho. It does not cover people who are receiving Medicaid or Medicare, which covers a lot of people. Those people might be subjected to other federal rules or regulations. But it is sort of setting the pace as an excellent health freedom law that doesn't just cover vaccines. It will cover, swabbing. It will cover masks. It will cover any medical intervention. And basically it's saying, informed consent is real in my mind. There's an obvious conflict between any medical mandate and true informed consent. If there's a mandate, it's not consent, it's coerced. So it's setting the bar higher. Other successes, we just fought back this year in 2025, a serious effort to remove the religious exemption in Hawaii. So where these religious exemptions have been removed is in states, sadly, that are, one party, it's the Democrat Party. And if they have the governorship, the legislature, and the attorney general, they have in the past in New York, California, Maine, and Connecticut been successful in removing a religious exemption. That's the only basis on which a kid can be able to go to school without following the state's mandates. So there was a very serious effort in Hawaii, which is a trifecta blue state. And the movement mobilized. Thousands of people contacted the Hawaii legislature, and basically they killed the bill. Right now, there's a pretty serious effort to remove a religious exemption in Massachusetts, also a sort of hyper Democrat blue state. I testified on Friday. The expectation is it's going to be voted out of committee. It's not clear if they're going to try to take that to the floor of the legislature. 2 states recently, more or less, got back a religious exemption, which is what allows parents to live there and not vaccinate their children according to the state's mandates. That is Mississippi, which did it through a federal court decision. No, I'm sorry, a state court decision, and West Virginia, which was by executive order of the governor. The legislature pulled it back some, but I think there's kind of a greater freedom now in West Virginia on that issue. Also, there have been some really good, 2 states already have outlawed fluoridation of water. Utah and Florida have both outlawed fluoridation of water. Those are some of the states. Actually, this is another really great success, and we cover these in our newsletter. Texas just passed a bill on food that foods that have petroleum-based dyes or that have non-nutritive ingredients with preservative dyes, really hyper bleached products like bleached flour, they will be labeled not fit for human consumption. And if some of these ingredients are there after 2027, there could be very serious fines. So there's some real triumphs, but there's just tremendous work to be done. I mean, over half of American kids are sick. As Kennedy often says, this is existential. Kids today have shorter lifespans than their parents. It's an existential crisis.
Well, I'm in Dallas right now. It's where I grew up, and as we say down here, God bless Texas. And I find it very ironic that the Pilgrims went to Massachusetts for religious freedom, and Massachusetts is trying to take away the religious.
I can't agree with you more, Mats. And what's crazy, when I prepared to testify on Friday, it's religious freedom is all over the state constitution. It's the first clause of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. It's like, what are these people thinking? It's like, and incredible about Massachusetts, you brought it up, it is the most vaccinated school age population in the country. So, and the majority of the kids who are not up to, snuff in the schedule, they're not kids of parents who have religious objections. They're kids that they just haven't gotten around to complying. So it is nothing to do with the parents who've expressed a religious exemption for their kids. I mean, it is purely punitive. It is on its face purely punitive in Massachusetts, which is everything that has happened to a conception of sort of human rights, informed consent, individual freedom, individual liberties. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me. It's mind-boggling.
I'm going to give you one more question, and I'll turn it over to the group for more questions. I have 3 daughters, and my oldest is 23. My youngest is 18. So I'm going to be right in the thick of this, hopefully not right now, but soon, going into the pregnancy, having grandkids, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're someone out there who's going to be facing this juggernaut of pharma, government, medical establishment tyranny, what would you advise those people? How can they arm themselves? What should they do to prepare to go into that buzzsaw?
Well, it depends on sort of where they are at that moment, Mats. So if, the mom to be and her partner are imagining that they should do everything that their white coated advisor tells them to do, and that's their starting point, you definitely have an education issue, right? And I highly recommend to people the film for free on our website, Vax2, because it really it interviews all the people who've suffered catastrophic vaccine injury, and then it interviews families who are unvaccinated. And a lot of them are families where the first child was severely injured, and then the subsequent children they didn't vaccinate. And those kids are just wildly healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy, spiritually healthy. They're just healthy, humans. And I think there's also, we have a free electronic book, ebook on our website. We're going to be putting it out so it's more available. But it's like a guide for healthy children, right? And it's not just about vaccines by any stretch. It's about sort of preconception and nutrition and all the things that go towards having a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby and a healthy young child. I think, for the people who are imagining that they're going to be getting good advice from the government and from their OBGYN and their pediatrician, that's the starting point. For the people who are already saying, yeah, I don't really want to do that. I'm bored. I believe that my child has an intact immune system. I intend to breastfeed. I don't really want all of these medical interventions. Then you want to really know how you want to have a birth plan, whether that's at home or in a birthing center, or if it's in a hospital, you really need to know who that doctor is going to be. And if you're going to see a pediatrician, you really want to know that that's a pediatrician who's aligned with you. We hear so many stories of young parents who are basically coerced by their doctors, oh my God, your child's going to die of XYZ. And so, if you are pretty clear that you don't want to go with the allopathic mainstream medical model, which may be changing, we'll see how far, Secretary Kennedy can get. Then you have to fortify yourself to go up against that. And you're going to need to find allies, whether it's chiropractors or, in my view, enlightened pediatricians who exist for sure, but you're going to have to search for those people. A great resource on that in the United States, I don't believe it's yet international, but it's called drgreenmom.com, drgreenmom, greenmom.com. And it's a listing of so-called vaccine-friendly pediatricians around the country. And that's a good starting point, right? So those are going to be pediatricians who are definitely not going to be browbeating you to vaccinate your children.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone from the group have a question?
David has a question.
I've got something.
Go ahead, David.
Am I unmuted? Great, thanks. Mats, thank you for hosting this. This has just been great. And Mary, thank you so much. Elizabeth and I just love the work, of course, that Children's Health Defense has been doing. My question to you would be, if you could wave a magic wand and solve the biggest obstacle standing in the way of Children's Health Defense achieving its mission or missions, what are the first couple things that come to your mind of what would be helpful?
The number one thing that comes to my mind, well, first, David and Elizabeth, I'm so grateful for all that you have done in Illinois and nationally for CHD. I mean, you guys have been true friends, and I'm really grateful. The first thing that comes to my mind is the censorship. We are still subject to very significant censorship, right? So we got back on X because there was a change in ownership, but we are still not on YouTube. We are still not on Facebook. We are still not on TikTok. The main ways that we're starting to get onto mainstream media as kind of like the mainstream is asking, well, what do you think about Bobby Kennedy? And they're always kind of looking for the angle of like, are you critical of Bobby Kennedy? But we are still really censored. We're censored by Google, right? So we are censored every day. I believe that had we not been censored from before COVID, right, from about 2018 on till now, I think we would be in a different universe than we're in right now. I really do. So we have a lawsuit that's going to be conferenced by the Supreme Court. I think it's June 24th, which is CHD versus Meta Platforms. That was against Facebook because they deplatformed us. They subjected us to all their crazy fact checkers. And then, Mark Zuckerberg has just lied through his teeth to the courts for years now, saying, oh, no, those were personal decisions. The government, didn't coerce us to do that. Whereas on Joe Rogan, he said, yes, the government coerced us to censor these people. So we, even though I do think the Trump administration has made some significant headway in ending the censorship industrial complex, that needs to happen. The other thing is, as I pointed out, we have to get rid of the liability shields for pharma, or at a minimum, we just have to get away from the idea that a government gets to tell parents like what gets injected in their children. I mean, when you really look at it, David, as you know, I mean, it's shocking, right? None of these products, not one that's on the federally recommended childhood schedule, has been properly tested as a matter of basic science. Not a single one has had a true control, or has been, had a clinical trial for a reasonable period of time. Hepatitis B shot was 5 days. I mean, this is shocking, right? It's just shocking stuff. So, and to that, I think before we can get to the point of saying, the states no longer, states are going to stop mandating stuff, which God willing, we will get to eventually, we have to wake up more people. We really have to wake up more people. And I think having Bobby Kennedy in the position that he's in is incredibly helpful. But it's still going to be getting over the censorship, getting the resources, getting out to more people, uniting together. We've got a lot more voices, which is great, but we're not always as coherent voices as we probably should be, or as cohesive. So there's a lot of challenges. But look at the progress that we've made. I mean, we've here we are, right? I mean, here we are, a global group talking about these issues. So, a lot of progress has been made.
Can I just add one thing to what you said? No, did I
I?
unmute? Yeah, I just got to add one thing. You mentioned the hepatitis B vaccine. And I think for anyone who's considering talking to friends or people about the vaccine issue, that is a really easy place to start, because the hepatitis B vaccine is mandated for kids within 24 hours of birth that they get the hepatitis B vaccine. The only way you get hepatitis B is by sexual activity or intravenous drug use. That's the only way you get hepatitis B. Yet every single child born has got to get that shot within 24 hours of birth. And there is no placebo-controlled study. Well, the study that's published, and you can look it up on the FDA website, they used 147 kids and they were followed for 5 days after the shot. That's the study that they used to determine that the hepatitis B vaccine should be given to every single child ever since. So when I'm having a conversation, I try to be calm with people who are really wondering, well, what's so bad about vaccines? I just invite them to consider the hepatitis B vaccine to start with, and does that make sense? And most people, just with that basic information, will be willing to just like say, well, maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe there's more to look at. So anyway, just want to put that in. Thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, David.
I would definitely ask them what the incidence of IV drug use and sexual transmitted diseases are in neonates. I mean, I do psychiatry as well. I tell you, my practice is not full of 1-day-olds.
Ulik, you'd like to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, I'm a new member of Mavericks, so this is the first event I've attended, and this is a topic I'm very interested in, especially since COVID. But it also I've a couple of sons on the autistic spectrum, and I have to question whether vaccines were part of that problem there, and also my brother died quite prematurely, I reckon, of a turbo cancer brought on by one of the COVID-19 vaccines, the Janssen one. But my particular interest at the moment is I've done a lot of research on malaria, which just straight off, I don't believe the conventional transmission story. I believe malaria is a disease of malnutrition. But there's a very heavy push now within that business, let's say the Gates Foundation people, etc., Wellcome Trust and all those others, to impose, I suppose, malaria vaccines on the developing world. And what I found particularly interesting, shocking at first, but then I found out it was standard practice, is that when in the double-blinded so-called placebo study, these vaccines were not tested against a true placebo. they were tested against a rabies vaccine. Now, I
Oh,
don't know on what planet an ethics committee could approve that. But one of the things I suppose that I heard from Bobby Kennedy lately is the issue to do with this whole practice, not through placebos. Like, I believe the standard practice with most vaccines, if they are tested, would be to test them against another vaccine, the previous version of the same vaccine, and they come out with some horseshit excuse that, oh, it wouldn't be ethical not to give them a vaccine because they're so life-saving, which is, you know, I think we all know the truth that if a vaccine with all of the nasty adjuvants were tested against, let's say, a saline placebo or something, that there would be a very negative result. So I suppose my question is, what chance do you think there is of Bobby Kennedy getting that particular ruling changed and forcing every vaccine is going up against some very strong interests?
Yeah, Ulik, the good news is he's changed that, right? So he said that no new vaccine can be put on the childhood schedule unless it is tested against a true placebo. So that already,
But
interestingly,
what about the ones that are already on it?
yeah, well, obviously that's the next step, and that hasn't happened yet. But it's interesting that I think it's Pfizer was working for several years with probably a lot of money on a flu COVID combination shot, Flurona, and they've now just discarded that. They're not going to continue with clinical trials. A Moderna one that was in, you know, an mRNA shot has continued. There's a new version which is awful. And I fully expect that they will get around to retesting the vaccines that are on the schedule. But, you know, Kennedy is walking a tightrope between the forces arrayed against him, which is the American Medical Association has come out against him. The Nurses Association has come out against him. 4 senators have already put in a bill, a vote of no confidence against him. You can bet that pharma is, you know, is against him. So he has to sort of balance that against all of us who want him to move even faster than he's able to move. He is literally sandwiched between strong forces on both sides, but the stronger forces in terms of, you know, the world that, you know, the pharma media manufacturing world, they are all stacked against him. And so until he can come out with comprehensive data based on HHS's own data, which I know he's working on right now, but until he can convince the public these products are doing more harm than good, he is really in a very difficult spot. So that's why his focus, he said, is radical transparency, gold standard science. He has to be able to convince the whole population, not half the population. He's already basically convinced in the United States half the population. Really, it's half of the voting population. Now, there is a need to convince a substantial part of the other half of the population to be able to really make these changes, permanent changes, not just like for 2 years and then it gets switched back. But I, you know, you have my condolences for your brother who passed away of a turbo cancer and for your sons who have autism. I have an adult son with autism, and for sure in my son's case, it was related to vaccines. There's no other explanation.
Joanna, you want to go ahead?
Hi, thanks, Mats. Yeah, just as per my question, and this is obviously to Mary and yourself and the group generally, I'm always curious as to why there aren't enough, given there seems to be a collective movement against the state intervention and coercion of vaccines and other medical interventions, why there aren't alternate billionaires who want to go up against the Gates Foundation to offer a better alternative, or an alternative platform to WHO, for led by America and like-minded countries, to get together to have a more, frankly, conscience-led agenda for health globally.
It's starting to happen, Joanna. So, Robert Kennedy just went down and met with, Milei in Argentina. Argentina was the only other country that said we're pulling out of the WHO and we're not going to go along with this, pandemic treaty. So he's already done that. The World Council for Health, led by Tess Lawrie in the UK, she has tried to put together what she is calling an alternative to the WHO. And there are billionaires who very much support this effort. For the most part, people who have significant resources are very quiet about their support of the health freedom movement. Not all, but in general, because their businesses will suffer, right? I mean, there is still the opportunity for real retribution, particularly in the science and medical space, against those who go against this paradigm. So there is support from wealthy individuals globally, but we haven't yet got to that tipping point where they are ahead of the curve and they're open in their support. But fortunately, I mean, particularly through Bobby Kennedy's effort to run for president, a lot of people came forward that you might not have otherwise recognized coming forward. I mean, there are some powerful individuals around the world who are aligned. And I think as more data comes out, really persuasive, hard government-owned data showing the level of harm, those numbers are going to increase.
And just as an aside, I dropped Denisa the information. I've been looking at getting a visa to the US, being based in the UK, and one of the requirements on the national government website is the requirement to have had 14, and I sent her the list of them from the website, 14 separate vaccinations. And for me personally, it just put a screaming
Really?
halt on my plans.
No, I'm not aware of that.
Denisa, if you can, my signal isn't connected to the screen, but if you can somehow copy and paste that into the chat, it's a screenshot of the detail on the website. And as I just looked at it, it's like, all right.
That's crazy. There is a group that, especially during COVID, I worked with, who helped people around the world get medical exemptions so that they could come to the US. So I can help with that.
Need to meet them.
Yeah, for sure.
Need to meet them. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mary, for this enlightening presentation. And Joanna, I tried to paste I will paste this picture when we do the replay, so people are aware of what we just talked, not just the people that are live here, but also everybody that will listen to this. I have a couple of questions. Some of them are from the members that couldn't join, and they sent them ahead. I wanted to start with one comment, in that it seems that there is a huge mafia, in a way, that has been infiltrated throughout the big pharma, not just over the last few decades, but half a century probably back. And I wonder whether the hope is in institutional change versus institutional abolishment. And I only remark this because I am an anarcho-capitalist. I despise anything related to central planning and government. And I think that the very existence of institutions like FDA and all the other health organizations that are supposed to protect us, they are actually not doing anything but make people comfortable that they can pass on the responsibility, in this case, the responsibility of the health of their children, to a third-party organization that is supposed to watch for their interest. And we see that it doesn't. And I just wonder if the right approach is, instead of changing these institutions, is probably to abolish them. This also comes from my own philosophical.
Yeah. Well, I think they have started to abolish some, Denisa. So they have just, there was one thing in particular that Kennedy has already abolished, slipping my mind for the moment. Well, and just getting out of the World Health Organization, they abolished something. Well, I guess it's not in the medical, but anyway, I agree with you that decentralization here is really important. It's possible to have agencies that are not captured. Certainly the ones that we have right now, the financial incentives are absolutely conflicted. So until you get rid of those financial conflicts, you can't have honest agencies. But it's way too much. I mean, this idea that the government should be able to tell you what you have to inject in your body, to me, this is just anathema. It's completely at odds with the concept of individual liberty that we really have, at least in the United States or globally. It's totally at odds with the concept of prior free and informed consent. How can you have informed consent if you're coerced to take a shot to go to school or work? It's completely contradictory, and it's got to be resolved. And it's not resolved yet, right? I mean, and there are very strong forces between biometric ID and vaccine passports and compulsory medicine to go the other way. I mean, it is absolutely poised, against the individual. So I agree with your general sentiment that the real answer here is to decentralize and to get away from government control of these things.
Thank you. One of the questions that a member has sent is in the comments is that they're very grateful for all the awareness that CHD is spreading across all these domains in big pharma. The question is, are there any top 3, let's say, critical solutions that you think anybody should be aware of in trying to navigate this environment that we all live in until things will get better? Is there anything that you'd like to mention?
Well, I do think that, the people who, I think education is number one, right? So, I mean, I think you do have to be aware, because otherwise, you can, it can cost you your life. I mean, I think we saw that during COVID. So I think education is the number one thing. I do think that being in touch with other people like Mavericks, who are like-minded, is incredibly valuable, not only for information, but just for moral support, because we are a minority. We are a very small minority in some ways. So I guess education, mutual support, and then, I encourage people, you do what you have to do, right? This is a matter of survival. This is not, this is not sort of something that's trivial. This is really about your life. And so I, encourage people to go with your gut, go with your instincts, and you do what you do. You do what you have to do to protect your children and yourselves. You don't have to announce to the world what you're doing, but you have to be resolute in these times. You may need to give up a job. You may need to give up your state or your country. I mean, I think the stakes, hopefully they lessen, but they may not. And these are, in my view, in my experience, these are life and death issues.
I couldn't agree more. The last question before we wrap this up, I think for everybody, the whole COVID situation and how this was managed and orchestrated globally was a huge wake-up call, and realizing that this is way serious than we even thought. And someone asks, what do you think, what are your thoughts on a potential next so-called pandemic? What would be the implications? How do you think people would react? And particularly, do you think there is more awareness now so that people react more positively to it rather than last time?
Yeah, I mean, the people that brought us COVID are definitely still at it, right? There's this new document of a biodefense group that has some of the, major names, like a Bill Gates, Donna Shalala, Margaret Hamburg. I mean, they're still, Tedros Ghebreyesus, they're all still at it, right? I mean, pandemics are incredibly lucrative. And if you imagine that some very powerful people really want to reduce fertility, reduce the global population, it's a great way to do it, right? You can blame it on, a virus. I do think that, COVID had the, I would imagine, unintended side effect of waking up billions of people around the globe to the craziness of what's happening, and created a level of wariness that certainly didn't exist pre-COVID. So I do think we know, based on polling information, that people are going to be a lot more skeptical the next time they try to play this again. But it doesn't mean they're not going to try. I mean, the good news is, again, I think Secretary Kennedy, I was going to show you, wrote a really good book about the bioweapons arms race, the Wuhan cover-up. This is all about, the industry of creating pandemics goes back 100 years. It's not new, and they didn't stop. And vaccines are inextricably linked to bioweapons, right? There's this loophole in the Biological and Chemical Weapons Treaty about dual use products. And so vaccines have been the cover for bioweapons for decades. So I don't think we're going to be free of another scare for a pandemic. I expect it will happen. I think the good news is that there are millions more people who are going to be really skeptical, and they're not going to comply in the same way. And that recognition on the bad guy side, if you will, I think will make them more cautious about this. But I think we would be foolish to imagine that the threat of another pandemic doesn't exist.
Thank you very much.
I don't want to end on a bad note, though. And the good news is that really this movement towards health freedom has made strides that were literally unimaginable a year ago in the last year. And it's not just at the level of government, it really is at the level of the population around the world. So I am definitely an optimist, and I'm grateful for having had the opportunity to speak with this important group here. So.
Absolutely.
The
Thank you
fact
so
that-
much.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much, Mats, for hosting this. It was a true honor and a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.